is deliberately concealing something from us, or from anybody, he will be privy to that, and he'll be able to shed more light. More enlightened explanation will be forthcoming. That was the reason. And that was a major stride forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience. Congratulations to ICAP for this wonderful audience, great attendance. Thank you to the panelists. Big round of applause to Mr. Abid Hussain, also coming from Islamabad.
So, thank you so much, Moin Saab, for, please take a seat. I think if I would request Mr. Ibrahim Sadat to conclude the session and sum up in few minutes. We have some time to sum up the session, and then we'll actually go towards the memento distribution ceremony. But I think I wanted to raise a question, but I can, if you allow, I can take a liberty. I think this code is talks about, there is one paragraph about at least auditors as well, which, in 2002, the first time the auditors rotation concept was introduced in the court. It remains almost the same after 15 years, although internationally, I think especially recently in Europe, many reforms regarding auditors have taken place, particularly around the auditors' rotation periods, etc. So just wanted to find out in the task force, was there a discussion to align these requirements with the international practices, and whether the task force thought that those international requirements are not very relevant to the Pakistan situation. Our code talks about 5-year rotations for the financial sector audits and a partner rotation concept for listed companies. And to my knowledge, I think very few jurisdictions are similar to our situation. Most of the rotation requirements are way apart. So just wanted to have your thoughts on what was the thinking process of not changing this rule.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Office bearers of the Southern Regional Committee, learned panel, Janab Abid Saab from SCCP, worthy audience, ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum. Such seminars are always a great learning experience for somebody who has engaged his attention and time for long hours in formulating something worthwhile, if it is considered to be worthwhile. But I can tell you that throughout this journey of 15 years, there has been no sense of monopoly of wisdom. There was no claim, as I said repeatedly, that this is a complete code and a perfect formulation. All we try to do with that learned members of the task force, that we pooled our experience and knowledge over the years based on real-time instances and experience in the field. And we try to, for instance, let me say, why did we need to have a code in the first place in 2002? Was there any dearth of good codes? Was Cadbury code at that particular time was not enough for us? Was King's report from South Africa was not something relevant? No. They were all masterpieces. But what we try to do, and as the first step in formulating the code, we try to identify the issues which ails the corporate sector in Pakistan. For instance, clustered shareholding, particularly in family enterprises. For instance, a very docile sort of a board of directors. For instance, a very perfunctory sort of a general meeting, and so on and so forth. Such issues then were debated very intensively and very thoroughly, and we tried to see what is the best solution in our set of circumstances. There was no dearth of good provisions from around the world. We studied Indian code, we studied Singaporean code, Hong Kong code, Sri Lankan code, of course the UK code, and so on and so forth. And we tried to take nuggets out of that and saw what is relevant and what could be most useful in our circumstances. And hence, the 3 codes which is in front of you. Gentlemen, what is important is, numerous questions, the overtone has been that who will determine who is independent director. Then the last question by my friend Riaz, that general meetings are held in God-forsaken place away from the city. This all boils down to, we say in corporate governance jargon, tone at the top. If the tone at the top is not something which contributes to the objectives of good governance, no matter what type of code you enunciate, what type of provisions you articulate, what type of enforcement regime you have, all these will fall to pieces. Because essentially, it is the dishonest orientation of mind which is causing all this trouble. I'm sorry to say that there's a lot of work to be done in this context. This cannot be done by courts. This cannot be done by rules. This cannot be done by anything else except persistent education and, of course, good monitoring, which SCCP in any case is doing. Because if the mindset is something which is not subservient to good discipline, none of these provisions and code will yield the desired results. People will find shortcuts to justify so-and-so is an independent director. Why do you think we prescribe a provision for submission of a declaration of independence? Do you think in this country we are not used to hearing about all sorts of certificates, whether in medical matters or whether in any other? There are all sorts of certificates and declarations abound because there is nothing which a law can simply do by prescribing. But in declaration of that independence, we thought, we at least expect our directors to be honorable gentlemen and, of course, ladies. And therefore, we want the first affirmative statement from them, whether, given the criteria laid down in the code, they consider themselves as independent or not. So this is a new provision. I know there have been occasions where we hear all sorts of objections about this declaration being a yet another requirement. You see, board of directors, I think there's hardly any room for disagreement, is at I would say, the cornerstone of good governance. It is the keeper of corporate conscience. It's the watchdog. And therefore, both at the composition level as also the quality of proceedings of the board, grade depends on these two factors. If you have got an ill-formulated composition of the board, you will not get the results. But then the question is, and we debated a lot at the time of Companies Ordinance 1984. Probably Abid Saab was not there at that time, I'm not sure. We debated at that time that with the clustered shareholding in family businesses, what kind of election of directors mechanism should we bring in so as to have an effective representation? When the time came for the first code, we brought in one particular provision, and it is that the company at its own cost shall provide list of shareholders to anybody who wants and seeks election, so that proxy solicitation process should be effectively done. In all advanced and developed countries of the world, this proxy solicitation is, for instance, CalPERS in the United States, the biggest pension fund, California pension fund. They are the biggest voice on the boards of many companies. They exert a great deal of influence. Therefore, what we thought, that unless proxy solicitation is done in an effective manner, but unfortunately, the 1972 provision of the company's election of directors order did not get implemented the manner it should have. Minorities, in the first place, who is a minority that is being debated even today, 1972 and this 2017. Then there were suggestions of having compartments or constituencies of shareholders. The shareholders holding, let's say, X% and below to form one constituency and people. But then, after a great deal of effort, I can assure you, at the end of the day, the underlying democratic process of election of directors holds supreme. Until now, we could not find an alternate, a viable, effective alternate, a palatable alternate, an alternate which could stand the legal test. We could not find. And therefore, the selection of directors is being done in the same manner as was done in 1972. But 1972 provision was the first stride forward. It brought in the concept of proportional representation, cumulative voting as we call it. Anyway, time will not permit me to go into all these specifics and provisions. What my friend Arsalan posed a question about not sufficient changes having been made in the code regarding the auditors. I think we thought that auditors have their own self-regulatory body, and it is effective enough. And the less intrusion or the less interference, the better. But well, that was just in lighter vein. I think it was a question of small doses. If you try to do changes in a wholesale manner, that appetite is simply not there for acceptance and implementation. And as I said repeatedly in the beginning, we wanted to follow an evolutionary approach. There is no point in ramming it through our throat, "Ye karna hai aapne," because we know that it will not get done. I can say one thing, there was a question here that the SCCP is acting very fast. Yes, it is acting very fast. Look at the legal reforms in this country. I think, the judicial reforms, I mean. They have not been initiated perhaps in a very meaningful way. I'm not privy to that, what are the proceedings of that. Look at the electoral reforms in this country. Now, these are all, pointers to governance. The kind of governance you will have in the country at the macro level, it will filter down at the corporate level as well. You can't remain away. It is not an island. It is a part and parcel same. It's part of the complete whole. So if the whole is not proper, the part is not going to be. Therefore, we tried that we will do that in small doses. Let there be absorption and acceptability. Let market digest that. Let them implement it. Let the regulator properly enforce. Because there is no point in having a bulk of laws and provisions. That law or provision is good, but there could be many things which are desirable. But only that law is good, which is enforceable in a meaningful way. You can have laws and laws and laws. I think Pakistan Code runs into its 21st or 22nd volume. There are laws about donkey cart, and there are laws about this and laws about that. But what is important is that do these laws get implemented? Do they get observed? That is important. Anyway, I must thank once again, and Mahinbhai, thank you very much. It has been, at least for me, a very educative exercise, because I'm sure going forward, the regulators will take cognizance of many points that have been raised in this gathering. Thank you.
We have a memento distribution ceremony for which I request Mr. Ibrahim Sadat to, sir, please come forward for the memento distribution. So I think first of all, Mr. Abid Hussain, please for the memento. I can. Okay. I think our president is also here, so I request Riyaz Sahab to come forward as well for the memento distribution. Mr. Kamran Mirza, sir, please come to collect. Amir Nasir Sahab. Jahazeb, please. And Moin Saab, thank you so much for moderating this very engaging discussion. I would request now our chairman of the SRC, Adnan Rizvi, to present memento to Ibrahim Saab, please.
Thank you. मैं कर देता हूँ. बैठिए रहा सर. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Mr. Abid Hussain, first of all, for coming all the way from Islamabad. He has always been very kind. Whenever we have invited him, he's accepted our request, and for a very crisp presentation, which was very educative for our audience. Ibrahim Sadat Saab for gracing the occasion. We tried to invite him on a number of occasions, but today we succeeded because this is his sort of